February 2nd, 1943, 3:47 a.m., North Atlantic, 340 miles west of Ireland. Captain Lieutenant Hans Weber pressed his face against the periscope eyepiece, watching the British convoy through the darkness. 7 merchant ships, perfectly aligned. Too easy. His U-boat had stalked them for 4 hours, maintaining the perfect firing position. Then, in the span of 17 seconds, everything changed. The destroyer materialized from nowhere, literally nowhere. No searchlights, no flares. Just sudden, violent acceleration directly toward U-514's position. Weber screamed the dive order, but even as the submarine's bow tilted downward, he knew. They'd been seen. Somehow, in total darkness through fog, they'd been seen. The depth charges began falling before U-514 reached 40 meters. Before we continue with what happened to Weber and his crew, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the North Atlantic, February 1943, where Weber was about to experience something that would change naval warfare forever. Weber survived. His boat didn't. As U-514 broke apart at 180 meters depth, 9 men made it to the surface. A British corvette picked them up 40 minutes later. Shivering in blankets on the enemy deck, Weber asked the question that haunted him. "How did you see us?" The British sailor just smiled. Weber wasn't alone in asking. Between January and May 1943, German U-boat command lost 96 submarines in the North Atlantic. 96 boats. That's 1 submarine every 36 hours. The kill rate had reversed. Suddenly, catastrophically. For 2 years, the U-boats had been winning. British merchant shipping losses had reached 700,000 tons per month. Churchill himself had written, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." Then in spring 1943, the peril evaporated. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat force, studied the loss reports with growing desperation. His boats were being hunted in total darkness, in fog, through storms. Destroyers and corvettes were making perfect intercepts from distances that should have been impossible. Surface radar had existed since 1940, yes, but it was crude, with range limitations and poor resolution. This was different. This was precision. "They have eyes we don't understand," Dönitz wrote in his personal log on March 12, 1943. He was right, but understanding what those eyes were would require an impossible stroke of luck, and a young physicist who'd never wanted to be at war at all. Dr. Friedrich Müller was 24 years old when he was drafted into the Kriegsmarine's Technical Intelligence Division in 1942. He'd studied electrical engineering at the University of Munich, specializing in radio wave propagation, work he'd loved for its pure theoretical elegance. War had seemed like something happening to other people, in other places. Then his best friend Klaus Richter died at Stalingrad. Klaus, who'd wanted to be a teacher. Klaus, who'd promised they'd open a radio repair shop together in Munich after the war. Richter and Müller Electronics, painted on a storefront window on Leopoldstrasse. They'd shaken hands on it the night before Klaus deployed east. Klaus died in the rubble of Factory District No. 7 on November 19, 1942, shot through the chest while carrying ammunition to a machine gun position. He was 23 years old. Friedrich stopped thinking about theoretical elegance after that. He started thinking about survival, about equipment, about the margins that separated the living from the dead. His assignment in naval intelligence was supposed to be routine: examine captured Allied equipment, write reports, file them. Most of what came through was mundane: life jackets, signal lamps, navigation tools. Then, on June 2nd, 1943, everything changed. A crashed British bomber, a short Sunderland flying boat, had been recovered mostly intact from shallow water off the Dutch coast. The aircraft had been shot down during an anti-submarine patrol 3 days earlier. When German engineers pried open the ventral compartment, they found something that didn't make sense: a compact metal device, roughly the size of a shoebox, with a distinctive cylindrical cavity in the center. It was connected to the aircraft's radar system, but it looked nothing like German radar technology. The engineering was alien, precise, impossibly small. "We need someone who understands wave physics," the senior engineer said. "Get Müller." Friedrich arrived at the Luftwaffe technical facility in Bremen on June 4th. The moment he saw the device, his hands started shaking, not from fear, from recognition. "This is a resonant cavity," he whispered, running his fingers along the precisely machined cylinder. This is operating at centimeter wavelengths. This shouldn't be possible." The senior engineer frowned. "What do you mean, shouldn't be possible?" Friedrich looked up, his face pale. "Our radar operates at meter wavelengths, 5 meters, maybe 50 centimeters at best. That's the limit of klystron and magnetron technology. Everyone knows that. The Americans, us, the British, that's the physical limit. But this—" He pointed at the cavity. "This is generating microwaves at maybe 10 centimeters, possibly shorter. The power density would be—" He stopped, doing calculations in his head. His expression shifted from confusion to horror. "What?" the engineer demanded. "If this works, if this actually works, they can see a submarine's periscope from 15 kilometers away, in darkness, in fog, through rain. They can detect a surfaced U-boat from 40 kilometers, and the resolution—" Friedrich's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The resolution would be precise enough to distinguish between two vessels only 50 meters apart." Silence in the room. "That's why we're losing," Friedrich said. "That's why 96 boats are gone. They can see us. They've always been able to see us." The device was a cavity magnetron, specifically a British Type 12 cavity magnetron, operating at 10-centimeter wavelength with a power output of 25 kilowatts. It had been developed by British physicists John Randall and Harry Boot at the University of Birmingham in February 1940, based on theoretical work by Rudolf Kompfner and others. The genius was in the cavity design. Instead of using external resonant circuits to generate microwaves, which was the approach everyone else had taken, the British had created a device where the resonant cavity was built into the magnetron itself. Electrons from a central cathode spiraled through the magnetic field, passing through the cavities and generating electromagnetic waves directly. The result was a device that could produce centimeter wavelength microwaves at unprecedented power levels, small enough to fit in an aircraft. Friedrich spent 3 days dissecting the magnetron, measuring every dimension, analyzing every component. The precision was extraordinary. Tolerances measured in hundredths of a millimeter, cavity shapes that required specialized machining. This wasn't experimental technology. This was production equipment, refined and perfected. "How long have they had this?" he asked the engineer. "We don't know. We've recovered fragments before, but nothing intact until now." Friedrich pulled out a notepad and started calculating backwards. The kill rate changed in January 1943, but there was a gradual increase starting in late 1942. "If we assume production and deployment time—" He looked up. "They've had this operational since at least mid-1942. Maybe earlier. Maybe as early as 1941. The engineer's face went grey. That's 18 months. 18 months of operations, and we had no idea. Worse than that, Friedrich said quietly. Every tactical adjustment we made, deeper diving, surface running at night, attacking from new angles, none of it mattered. We were adjusting tactics against an enemy who could see us perfectly all the time. We were blind men fighting someone with perfect vision. He filed his report on June 9th, 1943. 7 pages of technical analysis, concluding with a single recommendation. The Allies possess radar technology we cannot match with current production capabilities. The cavity magnetron represents a minimum 2-year technological advantage. Recommendation: withdraw U-boat operations from areas of Allied air coverage until equivalent technology can be developed. The report reached Dönitz on June 13th. 3 days later, Dönitz met with Hitler at the Berghof. Friedrich wasn't present for that meeting, but he heard about it later, how Dönitz had explained the situation, how Hitler had demanded German scientists produce an equivalent device, how Dönitz had quietly explained that Germany's industrial capacity was already stretched beyond breaking, that the precision machining alone would require facilities and expertise they simply didn't have. On May 24th, 1943, 2 weeks before Friedrich's report was filed, Dönitz had already withdrawn U-boats from the North Atlantic, not because of the report, but because the losses had become unsustainable. 41 submarines lost in May alone. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. Germany had lost. But Dönitz hadn't known why until Friedrich showed him the Magnetron. Word of the discovery spread rapidly through German technical intelligence. Within 2 weeks, 12 different research facilities were working on magnetron replication. Friedrich was assigned to the primary team at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. The work was exhausting and demoralizing. Every attempt to replicate the cavity design failed. The tolerances were too precise. Germany's machining equipment, degraded by years of war and Allied bombing, couldn't maintain the required accuracy. The materials were wrong. The British were using specialized copper alloys and ceramic insulators that German factories couldn't produce at scale. By August 1943, the team had produced a working prototype that operated at 15-centimeter wavelength with 8 kilowatts power output, less than half the performance of the British device. It was better than Germany's previous radar systems, but years behind what the Allies already had operational. "It's not enough," Friedrich told his supervisor. "Even if we put this into production tomorrow, we're solving 1941's problem. They're already moving past this. They're probably working on even shorter wavelengths, higher power, better resolution." His supervisor nodded grimly. "So, what do we do?" Friedrich looked at the dismantled British magnetron on his workbench. "We learn from it, we document everything, and we make sure that after the war someone remembers what this was, what it did. Because this—" he gestured at the small metal device. "This was the weapon that defeated the U-boats. Not destroyers, not depth charges. This." The impact of the cavity magnetron on the Battle of the Atlantic was devastating and immediate. Before centimeter wavelength radar became widespread in Allied aircraft, roughly mid-1942, U-boats could surface at night with relative impunity, recharging batteries and making transit at higher speeds. After centimeter radar, surface running became suicidal. The statistics are stark. January 1942, Allied merchant shipping losses, 419, 907 tons. May 1942, 607, 247 tons. November 1942, 729, 160 tons. Peak losses. January 1943, 261, 359 tons. May 1943, 264, 852 tons. June 1943, 95, 753 tons. By July 1943, German U-boats had effectively withdrawn from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The loss rate, 96 submarines in 5 months, was unsustainable. Replacement boats couldn't be built fast enough. Replacement crews couldn't be trained fast enough. The average life expectancy of a U-boat crew had dropped to 2-3 patrols. Admiral Dönitz's war diary from May 24, 1943. The enemy has rendered the U-boat ineffective by means of new location devices. We are facing the greatest crisis in submarine warfare. What Dönitz didn't know, couldn't know until Friedrich's report, was that the new location devices weren't multiple technologies. It was one technology, one elegant, compact, impossible device that fit in a shoebox. But the tragedy of the Magnetron wasn't just military, it was personal. The British kept the technology secret even after the war ended. The TISAD mission, the British delegation that brought the cavity magnetron to America in September 1940, was classified for decades. Randall and Boot received no public recognition during their lifetimes. The official histories of World War II radar mentioned them in passing, if at all. Friedrich Müller's report, the first comprehensive German analysis of the cavity magnetron, was captured by American forces when Berlin fell in May 1945. It was classified immediately, filed in U.S. Army intelligence archives, and remained classified until 1973. Friedrich himself survived the war. He returned to Munich in July 1945, aged 27, to find his family's home destroyed by bombing. His parents had been killed in a raid in January 1945. His younger sister had survived, living with relatives in Bavaria. He never completed his doctorate. Instead, he opened a radio repair shop on Leopoldstrasse, the shop he and Klaus had dreamed about. He called it Richter and Müller Electronics, painted the sign himself. He married in 1947, had 3 children, and spent 40 years fixing radios and televisions for the people of Munich. He never spoke about his wartime work. His children didn't know about the Magnetron report until after his death. Friedrich Müller died of heart failure on March 8, 1988, age 70. His obituary in the Münchner Merkur mentioned his radio repair business and his family. It did not mention that he had been the first German scientist to understand the technology that had changed the course of the Atlantic War. In 1995, a British historian named Robert Bouderi was researching the history of radar development. While examining declassified U.S. Army intelligence files, he found Friedrich's report from June 1943. Bouderi tracked down Friedrich's daughter Eva, who was living in Stuttgart. "Your father wrote this," Bouderi told her, showing her the translated report. "He was the first person outside Britain to fully understand what the cavity magnetron was and what it had done. His analysis was remarkably accurate." Eva read the report, tears streaming down her face. "He never told us," she said. "He never said anything." Bouderi included Friedrich's story in his 1996 book, The Invention That Changed the World. How a small group of radar pioneers won the Second World War and launched a technical revolution. 3 paragraphs, 78 words. It was the only public recognition Friedrich ever received. There is no memorial to Friedrich Müller. The building that housed Richter and Müller Electronics was demolished in 2003 to make way for a parking garage. The street where it stood no longer exists. The cavity magnetron itself, the British Type 12 device that Friedrich dissected in June 1943, was returned to Britain after the war and is now in the collection of the Royal Air Force Museum in London. It sits in a glass case in the radar exhibit, labelled Cavity Magnetron, Type 12, circa 1942. The placard mentions Randall and Boot. It does not mention the German physicist who first understood what it had accomplished, but the technology lived on. The principles of the cavity magnetron became the foundation for virtually all microwave technology developed after World War II. Microwave ovens, satellite communications, modern radar systems, medical imaging equipment. The device that defeated the U-boats in 1943 became the technology that connected the post-war world. And somewhere in all of that, In every microwave tower and radar dish and communications satellite, there's an echo of a young German engineer standing in a Bremen laboratory in June 1943, holding a compact metal device in his hands and realizing with quiet horror that his country had already lost the war. The Battle of the Atlantic officially ended on May 8, 1945, with Germany's surrender. Total casualties: 72, 200 Allied seamen, 30, 1,000 German submariners, 783 U-boats sunk. The cavity Magnetron is credited with saving an estimated 800 to 1, 200 Allied merchant ships that would otherwise have been sunk by U-boats, ships carrying approximately 5 million tons of cargo, including food, fuel, ammunition, and equipment necessary to sustain Britain and support the invasion of Europe. None of the men who died in those U-boats knew what had killed them. Most of them believed until the end that they were fighting a fair fight, that the margin between survival and death was luck, tactics, and courage. They were wrong. They were fighting against a technology they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't counter. They were fighting blind against an enemy who could see perfectly. And the physicist who first explained this to his commanders, who first translated the impossible into understanding, went back to fixing radios in Munich and never spoke of it again. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. We uncover forgotten stories like Friedrich's every week, and drop a comment telling us, do you have a family member who served in World War II? Did they ever talk about the technology they encountered? We want to hear from you. Thank you for keeping these memories alive. Thank you for making sure that men like Friedrich Müller, who understood the war in ways that changed history but never asked for recognition, are not forgotten. The magnetron on Friedrich's workbench wasn't just a device, it was a tombstone. Every measurement he took, every calculation he made, represented hundreds of lives already lost. German submariners who died, not knowing why their tactics had stopped working, not understanding that the darkness they'd trusted had become transparent. 3 weeks after filing his initial report, Friedrich received an unusual visitor at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. The man arrived without appointment, wearing a naval officer's uniform but no identifying insignia. He introduced himself simply as Hartmann and asked to see the British magnetron. Friedrich led him to the laboratory. Hartmann stood silently before the workbench for nearly 5 minutes, just staring at the compact device. "My brother commanded U-223, Hartmann said finally. "Lost with all hands, April 1943, west of Iceland. They never knew what hit them." He looked at Friedrich. Would it have made a difference if they'd known? Friedrich considered the question carefully. "No," he said quietly. "Knowing wouldn't have saved them. The technology gap was too wide. But," he paused, "but they would have understood. They wouldn't have died thinking they'd made mistakes. That better tactics might have saved them." Hartmann nodded slowly. "I suppose that's something." After Hartmann left, Friedrich sat alone in the laboratory until well past midnight. He thought about Klaus, about U-223, about all the men on both sides who died because of technological advantages they couldn't see. War had always been about better weapons, sharper swords, stronger bows, bigger guns. But this was different. This was a weapon that made your enemy invisible while rendering you perfectly visible. It wasn't just superior, it was unfair in a way that previous weapons had never been. He pulled out his notebook and began writing, not a technical report this time, but a personal reflection. He never showed it to anyone, never filed it officially. His daughter Ava would find it decades later, tucked into an old physics textbook. June 30th, 1943. "I have spent my entire education believing that science is neutral, that physics describes the universe without moral content. The magnetron has taught me otherwise. Technology is never neutral. It serves whoever wields it, and in war, service means death for the other side." Klaus wanted to teach children. Instead, science, my science, sent him to die in Stalingrad, while other science hunted submarines in the Atlantic. I don't know if I can forgive myself for being part of this, but I know I cannot stop. Because stopping means other men die unnecessarily, and Klaus wouldn't have wanted that. What Friedrich didn't know, couldn't know, was that his analysis of the British magnetron had triggered a parallel awakening on the Allied side. When American intelligence intercepted German communications referencing new understanding of Allied radar capabilities, in July 1943, alarm bells rang in Washington and London. The TISAD mission's gift to America, the cavity magnetron and its secrets, had been the most closely guarded technology of the war. If Germany had captured and reverse-engineered it, the advantage would evaporate. Dr. James Mitchell, a radar specialist at MIT's Radiation Laboratory, was assigned to assess the threat. He received translated excerpts from Friedrich's report on August 2, 1943. Mitchell read the report 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called his supervisor. "They know," he said simply. "They understand exactly what it is and what it does. But," he flipped through the pages, "but they can't replicate it. Look at these calculations." He's identified every limitation in their manufacturing capacity. He knows they're years behind, and he knows they can't catch up. His supervisor was silent for a moment. "So we maintain the advantage." "Yes, but that's not what concerns me." Mitchell tapped the report. "This German physicist, Müller, his analysis is brilliant, world-class. In another context, another time, he'd be someone we'd want working with us, not against us. And he clearly understands that his side has already lost. This whole report reads like—" Mitchell paused, searching for words. "Like a eulogy. He's documenting their defeat in real time." The report was filed and classified. Mitchell never learned Friedrich's first name, never knew he survived the war, never knew about the radio shop in Munich. But in September 1943, Mitchell proposed a new security protocol. Assume that the enemy understands all captured technology completely and immediately. The proposal was adopted across all Allied technical programs. The magnetron's effectiveness didn't depend on secrecy anymore. It depended on manufacturing capacity and deployment speed, advantages the Allies maintained until war's end. In a strange way, Friedrich's report had made Allied technology more secure, not less. By demonstrating Germany's inability to replicate the magnetron, he'd proven that some technological advantages were insurmountable within the time frame of war. Back in Berlin, Friedrich's work continued through the autumn of 1943. The bombing intensified. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute lost 2 laboratories to RAF raids in October. Friedrich and his team moved their equipment to a reinforced basement, working by candlelight during power outages, sleeping on cots between shifts. They produced 7 magnetron prototypes between August and December 1943. None matched British performance. The best achieved 12 kilowatts at 13-centimeter wavelength, respectable but still inferior. Germany's radar-equipped night fighters began using them in early 1944, with modest success against RAF bomber formations. But by then, the Allies had moved on to even more advanced systems. "We're chasing ghosts," Friedrich told his supervisor in January 1944. "Every 6 months, they're a generation ahead of us. We solve yesterday's problem while they're already solving tomorrow's." On February 3, 1944, the Institute took a direct hit during a daylight raid. Friedrich was in the basement when the building above collapsed. He and 4 others were trapped for 7 hours before rescue crews dug them out. One of his colleagues, Dr. Werner Vogel, age 31, father of 2, died of crush injuries while they waited in the darkness. Friedrich sat with Werner as he died. Werner's last words were about his daughters. "Tell them I was trying to bring everyone home. Tell them it mattered." Friedrich promised. After the war, he visited Werner's widow in Cologne. He kept his promise. The work became impossible to continue. Equipment was destroyed faster than it could be replaced. Precision instruments were unavailable. Chemical supplies stopped arriving. By March 1944, the Magnetron research program was effectively dead, not cancelled officially, just starved of resources as Germany's industrial capacity collapsed under constant bombing. Friedrich was reassigned to defensive radar systems, trying to improve early warning networks that might give German cities a few extra minutes of alert before Allied bombers arrived. It was futile work, and he knew it. But he did it anyway, because the alternative was doing nothing while people died. In his notebook, April 19, 1944, "I once believed technology could be elegant, pure. Now I know it only as desperate improvisation under bombardment. We are trying to solve equations while the building burns. Klaus was right to want to teach children instead. Children still believe the future is something we build. We know now it's something that happens to us, whether we're ready or not." The final irony of the Magnetron story came in February 1945, 3 months before Germany's surrender. A German reconnaissance aircraft, one of the few still operational, photographed a crashed American bomber in occupied Holland. The aircraft had been carrying the latest generation SCR-720 centimetric radar system, an evolution of the original Magnetron technology. Ground crews recovered the equipment and transported it to what remained of the Technical Intelligence Facility in Berlin. By this point, the facility was operating from a converted brewery. Most staff had evacuated. Friedrich was one of 5 engineers still present, mainly because he had nowhere else to go. His family home was rubble, communications with his sister in Bavaria had ceased, and the roads were too dangerous for civilian travel. They brought him the American radar unit on February 14, 1945, Valentine's Day. Friedrich remembered that detail because it seemed so absurdly inappropriate. Examining instruments of death on a day supposedly celebrating love. The American system was generations beyond the original British Magnetron he'd examined in 1943. Smaller, more powerful, more sophisticated. It operated at 3-centimeter wavelength, true microwave territory, with automatic tracking capabilities and target discrimination that would have seemed like science fiction 2 years earlier. Friedrich spent 3 days documenting it. Not because anyone had ordered him to, not because the information had any military value. The war was clearly over. The Americans were already crossing the Rhine. He documented it because he was a scientist, and documenting things was what scientists did. Understanding was its own justification. His final report was never filed officially. Berlin fell before he could complete the bureaucratic process. The report itself, 17 pages of meticulous technical analysis, was found by Soviet troops when they captured the brewery facility in late April. It eventually made its way to Soviet technical intelligence, where it helped inform post-war Soviet radar development. Friedrich never knew his final report had been useful to anyone. He assumed it had been lost in the chaos of Berlin's collapse. On April 28, 1945, Friedrich walked out of Berlin. The city was burning. Soviet artillery was closing in. The remaining German command structure had dissolved into chaos. He carried a small rucksack with 2 changes of clothes, a canteen, some bread, and his personal notebooks. All his wartime calculations and observations carefully wrapped in oilcloth. He walked west, joining streams of refugees fleeing the advancing Soviet army. It took him 19 days to reach Munich on foot, sleeping in abandoned barns, accepting food from farmers who had almost nothing themselves, watching columns of defeated Wehrmacht soldiers trudging homeward. He arrived in Munich on May 17th, 9 days after Germany's official surrender. The city was devastated. American occupation forces controlled the streets. Friedrich's family home was gone, not just damaged, completely gone, reduced to a crater filled with rubble. A neighbor told him his parents had died in the January bombing. His sister Anna had survived and was living with relatives in a village near Augsburg. Friedrich found Anna 3 days later. She was 19 years old, thin and exhausted, but alive. They held each other and cried in a stranger's kitchen while American jeeps patrolled the streets outside. "What do we do now?" Anna asked. Friedrich had no answer. He'd spent 4 years trying to understand technology that killed people. He'd become an expert in devices that made men visible to their enemies. He'd documented the weapons that had defeated his country. And now, at age 27, he was sitting in a kitchen in occupied Germany, holding his teenage sister, and realizing he had no idea how to live in a world at peace. "We survive," he said finally. "Klaus would want us to survive." Anna nodded. She'd never met Klaus, but Friedrich had told her about him in letters, about the repair shop they'd planned, about the sign on Leopoldstrasse. "Then we survive," she said. It took Friedrich 3 months to find the location on Leopoldstrasse where the shop would go. The building had been damaged but was repairable. The American occupation authorities were encouraging small businesses to reopen, part of reconstruction efforts. Friedrich had no money, but a sympathetic American officer helped him secure a small loan through a rehabilitation program. On September 12, 1945, Friedrich opened Richter and Müller Electronics. He'd painted the sign himself, carefully lettering Klaus's name first, his own second. Inside, he had a workbench, some salvaged tools, and a determination to never work on military technology again. His first customer was a farmer who needed his radio repaired so he could listen to news broadcasts. Friedrich fixed it in 20 minutes. A simple vacuum tube replacement. The farmer paid him with 6 eggs and a small bag of flour. "Pleasure doing business," the farmer said. Friedrich looked at the eggs and flour on his workbench. 4 years ago, he'd been examining the most advanced radar technology in existence. Now he was bartering for eggs. And somehow, impossibly, this felt more meaningful. Inna came to help him run the shop. She learned basic repairs, handled customers, managed the meager accounts. Together they built something small and real in a city that was learning to rebuild itself. Friedrich never spoke about the Magnetron, never mentioned his wartime work. When customers asked what he'd done during the war, he said simply, "Technical work, nothing interesting." It wasn't that he was ashamed, it was that the whole experience felt like it had happened to someone else, some other version of Friedrich, who'd spent his days measuring death while his country collapsed. That Friedrich had died in the basement of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute when the building came down. This Friedrich, the one fixing radios on Leopoldstrasse, was someone new, someone who'd chosen to live. In his notebook, November 1945, Klaus once asked me why I loved physics. I told him it was because the universe follows rules, and understanding rules makes everything less frightening. I was wrong. Understanding doesn't make things less frightening. Understanding just means you know exactly how powerless you are. But fixing things, taking something broken and making it work again, that's different. That's choosing to make the world slightly better than you found it. That's enough. That has to be enough. The decades passed. Friedrich married Helga, a schoolteacher, in 1947. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. The radio shop became a television repair shop in the 1950s, adapted to stereo equipment in the 1960s, added computer repairs in the 1980s. Anna married in 1952 and moved to Stuttgart, but visited every Christmas. Friedrich's children grew up in the apartment above the shop, falling asleep to the sound of their father working at his bench downstairs. He was a good father, patient and kind. He helped with homework, attended school plays, taught his son how to solder circuits. He was active in the neighborhood, known for fixing things for elderly residents who couldn't afford repairs. He was, by all appearances, exactly what he seemed. A quiet, competent man who ran a small electronics shop and lived a modest, unremarkable life. His children never saw the notebooks. They were stored in a locked drawer in Friedrich's workbench, wrapped in the same oilcloth he'd carried out of Berlin. Once every few years, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Friedrich would take them out and read through them, not with nostalgia, but with a kind of archaeological curiosity, as if examining artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. In 1973, when the US declassified his original Magnetron report, no one contacted him. The document was filed in publicly accessible archives, but it was one of thousands of technical intelligence reports from the war. No historians noticed it. No journalists wrote about it. Friedrich didn't even know it had been declassified. He continued fixing televisions and radios. He watched Munich rebuild itself into a modern, prosperous city. He voted in elections, paid his taxes, took his family on vacation to the Alps every summer. He was, in every measurable way, an ordinary citizen of post-war West Germany. Except that he wasn't. He'd understood something that had changed the course of history. He'd held in his hands the device that had defeated the U-boats, that had saved hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping, that had helped sustain Britain through its darkest hours. And then he'd spent 40 years fixing radios for housewives and students and pensioners, never once mentioning what he'd done. When Robert Bouderi found him in the archives in 1995, or rather, found his work, since Friedrich had been dead for 7 years by then, Eva was shocked. "I had no idea," she told Bouderi. "He never said anything. Never even hinted." Bouderi showed her the report. This changed the war, not by itself, but this was the moment Germany understood why they'd lost the Atlantic. Your father gave them that understanding. Eva read through the technical analysis, tears streaming down her face. "He just wanted to fix radios," she said. "After the war, that's all he wanted, to fix things instead of helping to break them." Bouderi included Friedrich's story in his book, 3 paragraphs, 78 words, a footnote in the history of the war. But for Friedrich Müller, it had been everything. The moment he'd held the magnetron in his hands in June 1943 had defined the rest of his life, not because of what he'd done with that knowledge during the war, but because of what he'd chosen to do afterward. He'd chosen to fix things, to make them work again, to spend his life making small repairs in a world that had been shattered. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't the kind of story that history remembers, but it was real, it was honest. And for Friedrich Müller, who'd spent 4 years documenting weapons that killed people, it was redemption.